Welcome to the Global Supply Chain Week and our panel on the pandemic and how it's changed the air cargo sector. My name is Eric Kulisch, air cargo editor for FreightWaves and American Shipper. The pandemic devastated passenger travel and airlines have downsized in response to survive. About 25% of the fleet is still grounded and there are fewer flights. That means less cargo is being carried. Capacity is at least 20% below pre-pandemic levels. That has pushed a lot of freight to the all-cargo carriers, which are enjoying record levels of business. So it's a feast or famine story for the airlines that move freight. And the pandemic has exposed weaknesses in the supply chain, infrastructure bottlenecks at airports, a lack of transparency and speed booking reservations and sharing master airway bills, and of course, the extensive use of paper documents that are handed off at each connection. Now nobody wants to touch paper with COVID. Joining us to discuss some of the lessons learned and the way forward is Stan Wraight, the CEO and president of Strategic Aviation Solutions, which provides management and consulting services to airports, airlines, freight forwarders, international financial institutions, and other trade organizations. Stan has held leadership positions at 3 major cargo airlines and is frequently mentioned as one of the most influential people in the air cargo industry. Welcome to the program, Stan.
Thanks very much, Eric. I'm pleased to be here, and I hope I can help pass on a bit of information of what we've learned over the past year. It's been a tumultuous one, to say the least. A lot of innovation and a lot of people having to do what they never thought they would ever have to do.
Exactly. So let's start on the economic end. Maybe you can you give us a snapshot of the market today? This is typically coming out of into the new year, supposed to be a slower period, but shipments are pouring in, rates are high. There's usually a lull during the Chinese New Year in manufacturing, but not so much this year because factories stayed open, so people wouldn't travel as much. And then we typically see a mini spike and then a valley again going into the first quarter further on. So, but we seem to be more in a constant peak right now. So can you tell us where things stand from the perspective of the carriers and the shippers and how the rest of the year looks?
Sure. Well, first of all, we got a very diverse group of people involved now. I mean, you have to look at, there's another factor besides COVID, caused by COVID, and that's on the sea freight side. I mean, I read a story yesterday about Long Beach. There's airplanes, there's ships sitting out there for 10 days, 12 days, and then 6 and 7 days in port to be offloaded and unloaded. So that's not helping the circumstances either. But definitely the lack of wide-body passenger aircraft, and quite frankly, that's going to continue for quite a while to come, the larger ones, 777s and all that. We've heard a lot over the past years about people retiring 747s. I think they're almost extinct now, except for the freighter version. The other thing is the cargo carrying passenger airplanes, which are now called preighters. I don't like that term, which is basically passenger freighter, where they're removing the seats. Air Canada was one of the first ones to do it. I think within 5-6 days of this all starting with transportation of PPEs in particular, they were able to modify some 777s and they got in the game fast, and now everybody's following suit. So that's one thing. On the airport side, you're looking at airports such as Heathrow, for example, who are now having more cargo flights than they, and before there was almost a ban on them because you couldn't get a slot. Now you're seeing almost more cargo flights than you are passenger flights, etc. So there's a whole mindset change. What I'm worried about, to be honest with you, is that this is not another lessons learned and then quickly forgotten when the passenger market rebounds, because what it has exposed completely is the fragility of the supply chain for everybody. I'm talking about automotive manufacturing to aerospace, but also the obvious things like PPE and health issues. I mean, when you have to support your manufacturing process globally, sourcing globally, you've got to have a rethink right now. Just in time, is it going to become just in time, or keeping an inventory just in case because you don't want to get caught like this again? So there's a lot of rethinking going on. economic. Sorry,
yes, no,
Eric.
good points. And as far as the passenger freighters, temporarily using some of those planes that are idle, I think there's only a very few, limited amount that have actually stripped the seats out. But a lot of them are flying. A lot of airlines are flying those planes. So, just using the bellies of the planes to move cargo. And then, a handful have stripped the seats out to get some extra capacity while air travel's down. But can you give us a sense of do you have a sense of how tight things are or what the rates are on some of the major trade lanes and, when there might be some relief for shippers, or is this going to be like this all year?
I'm afraid it's going to go on beyond a year, I think. Quite frankly, if you look at, let's look at the real driver of the aviation business for the ones that don't consider cargo as a core business. You're going to look at a rebound in the passenger market. Quite frankly, we're not seeing much before 24, 25. And it's obvious. If you look at India, they're hoping to vaccinate 250 million people a year. Well, there's 1.2 billion people. So what's going to happen there? What's going to happen in South America? I don't see the borders opening up for international leisure travel other than what we call VFR, visiting friends and relatives, and business. Even Microsoft, if you listen to Bill Gates and others, we're going to see business travel plummet as well. Look, in my personal case, I'm a 150 to 200,000 mile a year guy. I haven't flown since last January. And that's the first time in 50 years I can say that because I've been in the business that long. I'm actually sleeping 8 hours a night. I've never done that before. So what we're looking at is we have to take a dose of reality. Bigger airplanes are going to struggle to get back into, if they're totally dependent on passage, or some cargo contribution, they're going to struggle to get those 777s back up in the air. The 787, A350, and the narrow bodies, especially the new ones that are coming in, the 321 long range, the MAX returning to service, you're going to see a lot of that. If you have 100 passengers, why would you fly an A330? Let's say that's the next step up, unless there's a significant contribution of cargo in the belly. And the way most airlines are looking at it today, and you mentioned lots of people haven't taken the seats out, but lots of people have, and you see it more and more now. There are flights flying the North Atlantic today for the automotive manufacturers in the US that are Mercedes and other people are paying for the whole flight both ways just to get those lower 10 pallets. So that's how critical the supply chain is being affected. And when sea freight doesn't work, if you add that to the equation, we're really in trouble. And people are closing down because of it. Now, if you go back to the airlines and the passenger market, if you have 100, 125, 140 passengers, instead of today, 15, 18, if it flies at all, you don't need a 777 with 400 seats. It's as simple as that. So what's going to happen to those aircraft if we don't up our game in cargo and meet this new reality? And that's the mindset change that airlines have to take. They have to get into the business of being able to make enough money in the lower deck of their airplanes and sustain that for years to come. And that means they have to up their game in what they're offering to the market. They have to change their attitude. You cannot survive in the future if you're going to start giving cheap prices to third parties and expect the airplanes to fly again. They've got to make a fantastic return on investment. Hence, and I'm not talking about exploitation because a lot of that is going on, and I'll discuss that in a moment. I'm talking about a fair return on investment, and also it can be that the airports and the ground handlers can also step up their game with offering more capabilities. On the gouging part of it, I mean, if somebody is operating just for the bellies, you got to cover all the direct operating costs of the flight, sometimes both ways. And on top of that, that means, they're not flying for the fun of it. You're going to be paying $5, $6, $7 a kilo, even on the North Atlantic. That's what it's going to cost. But and the other complication of these passenger freighters is there's not much that you can load up on the main deck except you can't load mail, you can't load anything with dangerous goods because there's no fire suppression systems. It's all manual on the main deck. That's what the cabin attendants are trained to address. The lower deck has all the fire suppression. So it's very limited what you can put up there. It's ideally suited to things like PPE, but it's not suited to general cargo for car companies or aerospace companies and everything else because of weight, density, size, whatever, restricted articles. So I think we're in for a tough time for everyone, and it's time that we had a rethink on how we approach what we do.
Well, what needs to be done? I mean, I think they're already putting some of these passenger planes into cargo mode. What's the next step? I know, it seems like there's a few innovators out there, like Air Canada is going the next mile, and some of the retired planes they're now going to convert to freighters and kind of start an all cargo division, kind of like Lufthansa and Korean Air and so forth. And United Airlines has been massively using its passenger fleet. So that's a couple. But I guess you're saying more people need to do that.
The best example of a company that's really done well is Emirates. I mean, they've operated, I think, close to 9,000 flights already, just for cargo. And the passenger flights that they operate, the cargo contribution is driving it. And I know this, I've heard it from the horse's mouth, that the cargo division is very much the one who decides where they're going to fly for the passage. One thing I've got to give a lot of credit to Tim Clark, the CEO of Emirates. He's always understood cargo as a key business, and he also understands and is giving credit to the cargo division to help save the airline. Air Canada, when Tim Strauss was their VP there, he immediately jumped on this because he has a lot of experience. He's an extremely brilliant guy. He talked to the engineering team, they talked to Transport Canada, and they had those airplanes reconfigured in record time. It didn't happen in the US because they couldn't get, not that they didn't want to do it, but the authorities were not keen on it. So, it takes time to do these things. United, with Jan Krems over there, he knows cargo, upside down, and he went after it, and he did a great job. And he has a great organization over in Europe supporting him to make sure in both directions it was full. But, we also saw Air Mauritius go bankrupt. We saw a whole bunch of airlines go bankrupt as well because they just didn't understand their contribution into the supply chain. And the fact that if you talk to the people who are in the supply chain, especially the industrial environment around the airport that depends on you, they could have probably worked out something, but they didn't understand cargo, and the consequence is they went under. A lot of airlines are serving destinations which don't make any sense for cargo. If you're flying from France to the French Caribbean, there's not much you can do when all the hotels are down. So the airlines going bankrupt, it's just not much you can do about that. But certainly on the major trade lanes, you have to do something. What's particularly disappointing to me, though, in this time of crisis, when we should be looking at cargo and putting all of our thoughts behind it, we're doing the opposite in some major airports, and we're doing like IATA, letting Glenn Hughes retire. And that astounded. They should have been in his office on their knees begging him to stay. Luckily for Tiaka, he moved over there. But another example would be the grounding of the 747s, especially the combis, by airlines at a time when they can serve a very good purpose. And again, it can't be for cost-cutting reasons because people are willing to pay for that capacity. It's just you got to explain your business case and keep them flying, and it's not being done. So I think in the C-suite, these CFOs and CEOs have to start understanding that cargo is a core business now, and it's certainly going to retain that need going forward because the recovery of the passenger market is going to take time, a lot more time than people are saying today.
Right. So I think what you're saying, there was some thought that the air cargo boom for the all cargo carriers would and for using these passenger freighters would be through part of this year, but then peter out. But you're saying the cargo carriers and the preighters will be busy for the next 2 or 3 years at least.
Well, I don't know about the preighters. I can say on certain routes they definitely will. Um, if I was anybody who owned a 777 passenger airplane, I would be talking to GCAS and IEI about converting them to freighters as quickly as I could. To be honest with you, because
Those are the leasing companies.
yeah, so much a leasing company. A lot of airlines own them as well outright. So I mean,
Right.
either one or the two. There's a good program out there with GCAS right now, but that's not going to solve Air Canada's problem or United's problem if they own the airplanes, because they're not going to convert your airplane. They're going to convert their own. So that's another thing. But on the business case for passage, which drives the companies that don't consider cargo as a core business, I think there are press statements that things will be all much better than next year, and we'll all be happy, and we'll all be running around and going on vacation in Bali and everything else next year. I think they're just delusional.
Right. So so you mentioned the conversions. So is freighter conversions of taking these passenger planes and older ones and cutting a door in them and so you can use and reinforcing the floor so you can use the main deck? Is that it seems like that activity is very strong in the past year? Is that accelerated? And if so, why? And what are some of the prized aircraft models?
Okay, well, first of all, it died in the wide body. Other than the 767, I would say medium wide body. The 330 has struggled because it's not the ideal aircraft for cargo, but it still has some takers, particularly in the integrator and the express mode. But the 747 conversions died, and a lot of you have to understand also in the airline's point of view, the potential candidates for these airplanes. In the 747's case, what killed it mostly is the fact that you run an airline just for an airplane type. Once you start deciding on a 747, in the case of some European airlines that are down to maybe one or two freighters, you have to sustain a whole infrastructure to support that. Pilots, crews are almost doubled versus when you have scale. So that also helped to kill the 747. So people stopped converting those. The hot items have been the 737s, the A321. It's going to be a great freighter when they do it. They're starting to do it now. Some of the narrow bodies, and the 767 has been the hottest conversion target, for the last years. And Amazon drove a lot of that, and the e-commerce market in China. SF Express 10 years ago operated 4 old beat up A300 B4s. Now they've got 62 airplanes, and they just bought Kerry Logistics, which shows you what you can do if you take cargo seriously. And some of the passenger airline CEOs should take note of that. I mean, if you can pay $2.2 billion for Kerry Logistics out of the profits from running an airline, that should send a message to the CEO and the CFO. But the conversion market of the future is the 777-300ER. It's a beautiful airplane. I love it. A lot of people are saying, but there's no buts. That's perfect airplane for e-commerce. And e-commerce is the future of air freight. I think in Wall Street Journal about 6 months ago on the front page, I liked it a lot. It was an article that said, for the first time ever, Intel chips have to compete with dog food to get on an airplane. And that's a true story, because when you buy something today on e-commerce, you're buying time. You're buying 2-day delivery, next day delivery, or if it's 15 to 20 days or whatever, with almost no problem, it'll be delivered in this window. It's usually postal, but that still ends up going by air. If it's coming from China, you're buying an iPhone cover. They're not going to send it to you by FedEx, UPS, DHL, or Amazon Prime or something like that. So the world is changing. The average volume right now of e-commerce, if you take out an average by our studies over in Europe, is 1 to 6, meaning it's roughly the same scale they use in the air freight industry for volume calculations. It's not that fluffy, but it's fluffy enough that a 777-300ER conversion will fit very nicely. And I think I love that airplane. I think it's going to be a great success. And that's in the future. Oh, I should add something. I don't know if it's public knowledge. Maybe I'm giving you a scoop here, but Airbus has launched a project to make the A380 into a combi. Now, I don't know if you know what a combi means, but it's basically a passenger freighter mix. And the project, the idea they've come up with is making the lower deck, the main passenger cabin, into cargo, and keeping the upper deck for passage, putting a cargo door aft of the wings to accommodate it. Great idea, actually, because the airplane is going to end up in the desert otherwise, or parted out, or scrap, because it's just too big for the years to come. But they better get at least 50 or 60 orders to make that one work. But it's out there, and people are thinking that way.
And so that would be to convert the, that would be they would modify some of the existing planes.
Yeah, exactly. They would modify, like you convert a 777 into a freighter, you basically rip it apart and put it back together again. Well, they would do the same thing with the A380, but that would be a massive engineering undertaking and a massive cost. So I know it's just a project now, but it just shows you that people are thinking that passage, if Airbus is thinking passage is not going to come back enough to support what was their crown jewel, take it in.
So yes, we got to wrap up here soon, but obviously e-commerce is booming and driving a lot of this market. What are any other hot commodities that are putting so much freight on the planes?
So again, I go back to, you've got to look at logistics again. They got to get back to people in the air freight industry, have to get back to not just leaving it up to the freight forwarders to talk to the customers. They've got to talk to the people who actually, we call beneficial cargo owners, BCOs. You got to talk to these people. What do they need in the future for their supply chains? Are they going to go to near shoring? For example, they're manufacturing Japanese cars and Korean cars and German cars in the United States now. Well, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do in the next coming years? Are you going to build supply chains over here instead of having them in Asia and Germany? I want to know that because I have to plan for it. If you don't talk to these people, how can you build an airline that's going to serve that marketplace? So I think they got to get back to talking to the actual logistics decision makers, which is the beneficial owner of the cargo. And 99% of the time, that's the importer, by the way. So that's one issue, and the supply chain logistics, it's got to be upgraded. The skill sets of the airlines has to be improved, or else Amazon and Alibaba and a few others are going to take over the market. If you think the pricing was horrible when the freight forwarders controlled everything, just wait till you're only dealing with Amazon and Alibaba and see what kind of return on investment you're going to get.
So, well, listen, fascinating insights, Stan. I'd love to keep talking. We didn't even talk about the vaccine rollouts and the digital initiatives to use more technology. So we'll have to do that another time. But really appreciate you joining us here at FreightWaves. And we will talk to you soon. Thanks to our audience for joining.
Okay, Eric. Pleasure. Anytime.
All right.